My name is Amit Kinha. I'm the field CTO at DoiT, where we specialize in helping cloud ops and FinOps with many of our customers getting the true value of the cloud out. Previously joining DoiT, I was a director of cloud FinOps at Citibank, where for a number of years I led our practice around cloud FinOps. And when you think about FinOps, oftentimes if you ask, say, 4 people in the room today, you might get 8 different answers, right? You might get answers around, well, we help with optimization, we help with things like the savings plans at the end of the day. We might also be doing some sort of ETL things, and we might be building a lot of reports, right, and a lot of dashboards. And while all of that was true, the thing that I found I was doing the most often, which moved the needle, was really around building confidence in the cloud. When a managing director would see a bill they didn't really understand, and they're panicking about it, sitting down with them and helping them understand that, yeah, the bill went up $500,000 for their product in the last month, but that's not really a negative thing because look at the revenue that they got out of it. Or, cloud is elastic, and so budgets were really hard, but that's not a negative thing either because that means we're really paying for the things we're using. And what I found was oftentimes this confidence I'm describing is what FinOps was really about. It was not about the ETL pipelines that I'd be fixing or looking at our payer accounts and trying to organize tags forever and ever, but really around how do we get people to get confidence that the stuff that they're actually doing in the cloud is A, efficient, B, that the value they're getting back is really immediate, and finally, getting the data to the right people at the right time. Right? Oftentimes reports that we would generate would either go static or oftentimes it felt like a very ad hoc thing. Someone would come to my team to ask about, what can we do about FinOps? I see my bill is creeping up every month, and I'm not really sure whether it's a good or a bad thing there. So what I coined the term here is FinOps 3.0, where we get to a place where we're no longer just looking at dashboards, we're no longer just looking at tagging or anomalies without context, but we're in a place where it's a cohesive whole. So talk about 3.0, I guess we should take a step back and, well, what the hell is 3.0 in the first place, right? And I think about it this way. 1.0 was all about visibility. And this is where we started thinking about, we have many different accounts on AWS. We might have some other cloud vendors. And what we really want to be able to understand is the what. What is the money going towards, right? You come from an on-premise background where everything is pretty much taken care of, right? You have a CapEx spend for 5 years. Engineers will request some amount of CPU and memory for their Kubernetes nodes, their VMs. And that was all there was to it. And 1.0 was about, well, how can we now aggregate this data across 4 different accounts for one team? Or how do we now look at something that happened without the bill at the end of the month, right? So we had a lot of dashboards, we had a lot of reports. And 2.0 to me was next question would be asked is like, okay, I can see my bill, but now what do we do about it? Can we optimize? Can we now get alerts faster? Can we have budgets that are actually reasonable and not go out of style or out of date every month when we launch a new product? And 2.0 had a lot of really good, interesting things there around optimization especially. We started thinking about things like Kubernetes. Can we optimize at the workload level? Can we think about networks? Can we think about intelligent tiering on S3, for example? But oftentimes in 2.0, what I found was that even at Citi, we would see a list of recommendations that were, say, 17 pages long. And oftentimes I'd go to the engineering team and say, well, you should do these 3 things. And they would either reply with, well, we can't prioritize this, we're trying to build a business, or this thing actually doesn't apply to us, right? Around anomaly detection, we would get an alert that says, hey, you spent $1,000 more than yesterday. An engineer would just right-click, in Outlook, make a new folder they would never look at afterward because they realize, well, this is not a negative thing, we just launched to production. So oftentimes we're lacking a lot of context, right? And the lack of context really makes it that we're looking at one part of the whole, which is the cloud cost, and not necessarily architecture, the business outcomes we care about, or anything that actually moves the needle there. So 3.0 for me is all about confidence, right? We go away from this place where, you talk to FinOps to any CXO, and they think about the invoice that they get every month and the bill that keeps creeping up and up and up. And the engineers think about, well, yes, I'm supposed to care not only about security, resiliency, availability, but now my manager really wants me to care about cost. Great. And we get into a place where the tools that they're getting and the data they're getting is not only full of context, but it's actually meaningful, right? Especially when it comes towards optimizations, when it comes towards guardrails, when it comes towards data that's relevant there. So within 3.0, There's three key pillars that I think about. There's data, there's efficiency, and then there's governance. And data is probably the place where we have done the most amount of work, right? We now have reports. We got, like I said, a lot of dashboards. Some people are doing unit economics really well. Some, are still struggling with that. And we have, efficiency. We have some level of optimization insights. And governance, we have a little bit, right? We get anomaly alerts once in a while. But to be able to transform in the age of AI, where even if you thought cloud was a little bit, chaotic compared to on-prem, with AI, especially and agentic AI on the rise, and any sort of chatbots or any Gen AI workloads you're doing, it becomes critical to move forward in FinOps, where instead of being in a place where it's very reactionary, right? The milk is spilt. Let's take a look at it. Let's try to solve it. And all the engineers are focused on optimization for, say, a week or a month. And then eventually it starts creeping back up again until someone freaks out about it. Instead of fixing it that way, I think we have to move forward in a place where the context is loaded in the heart of all three of these pillars. So what I'll do now is double click into each of these and explain what I mean. So on the data side, I think we have the most amount of work done already in FinOps, right? From 1.0, 2.0, we already have level of unit economics. We already have some sort of anomalies. We already have reports we can get. But the problem still is there, where if someone wants data, right? Say your CEO wants to now negotiate the new PPA deal. They will still go to the CTO, who goes to the IT director, who goes to the FinOps head, and who eventually goes to the FinOps engineer, who will extract some data, put into Excel, put into a PowerPoint, goes back up the stack, and the CEO may ask, well, what about this Gen AI thing? Can we load that in? And this whole game of telephone repeats itself again and again. And the other thing that we have today is that, sure, you can see the costs in very granular fashion, right? Even at Kubernetes level, we solved it, because now we can say, well, we can allocate the cost by namespace, for example, as a proxy. We have tagging strategies that are pretty well thought out, and we can bifurcate costs, that's, say egress or data transfer, by doing things like cost follow cost. But we're still missing, to me, is this key concept, which is contextualizing the data, right? Instead of just thinking about data from a perspective of the cost itself, what we're still missing is the context around the business outcome we really cared about. It might be that when you launch a new product to production, of course the cost is going to go up, right? But without having the context and knowing upfront, you're still going to get an anomaly that is irrelevant to you. Or it might be that, we're getting a lot of different data reports. However, what are we actually doing with them is still happening outside, right? A product person may get a data set that says the unit price for, daily active users is this much, but they still have to then think about, well, how do I now use this data in my decision tree to think about, well, how do I price my B2B app better? How do I think about margin protection? And if you're on the, in an FSI, for example, you're thinking about revenue for the quant libraries that you're running every day for risk analysis, but not knowing what are you actually getting back in return, either the number of calculations or whether this upgrade that we did that was, benign and a refactor is actually causing our things to spike a lot more. If you don't do these things properly, it still becomes one of those things that, cost data is still seen as a number that we always have to tamp down, rather than thinking about it from a perspective of, well, the cost is going up, but look at how much more we're getting back in return. So for me, there's really three keys of focus here. The first one is around what matters most for performance and value, or rather, for connecting the cloud spend towards business outcomes. And we had started this in FinOps 2.0 when we started thinking about, say, unit economics, right? But we still are very short of where we need to be, which is, what are we getting back in return, right? Instead of thinking about Gen AI, for example, you open up a chatbot internally, and it just connects to, say, some MCP server that does, vacation days. And what you don't realize up front is that every engineer or everyone in your company is going to love this chatbot. And whatever you had thought about before of daily active users or the number of tokens you'd be using, it kind of goes out the window when it's so variable there. Rather than relying only on, say, a cloud cost being this absolute number that should go up and down every month, we really have to start thinking about, well, what are we getting back in return there, right? Maybe the cost has to go up because this new product that we're launching is very expensive, but the ROI on it might not even be revenue. It might be that our daily active users is increasing tenfold, and then we can serve them ads. The second place I think cloud cost, right, visibility needs to improve would be around the way we explain the why. So today we do a really good job of explaining the what. We can take $1 million a month cloud cost from AWS We can bifurcate it between every product team. We can even go between environments to say sandbox costs this much, non-prod is that much, and production is blah. But we still can't answer the why did the cost go up, right? At the end of the day, the cloud cost to me is just another point in your decision tree when you're making better decisions. It might be that you want to do optimizations today because you realize that every time we're doing a PR on Terraform, the cloud unit price for our million API calls is increasing tenfold. There has to be something else we can do there. Because if you don't do that, especially with Gen AI, and if you don't do it now, it's going to get very difficult where all of a sudden, every time you use a different model, or you have a context that's being changed, or the embeddings it's not being utilized properly, this variable cloud cost that we have today is only going to increase in variability, and it's just going to cause a lot of heartburn, right? Every single person will just think, this number, it will never go down until someone freaks out about it, and then we have to have this whole 2-3 week cycle where we put all our heads down, figure out the unattached EBS volumes, or hey, this bucket that's just holding logs should not even be in standard, it should be in whatever. But instead, we get into this continuous cycle where we're getting the data when we need. And the last part for me would be around delivering the right data to the right person at the right time. So oftentimes I feel like, as a former engineer, still engineer a little bit, I find this trope in FinOps is that engineers don't care about cloud cost. And to me, it's always been really funny. It's like, it's not that we don't care about it. It's more that if you think about every single other metric that we quote unquote care about, right? Be it throughput, performance, reliability, availability, we have the tools to help us get there, and it's quantifiable. You can tell when you have 100 transactions a second. You can tell when you can support 100 active daily users or 1 million. And you can tell when security itself is it's embedded in the life cycle of development. But with cloud cost, we still look at it as something that we're supposed to care about, and yet we don't really offer the proper tooling. We don't tell engineers that, hey, this simple web server that you're running could run on Lambda, it could run on ECS, EKS, Fargate, whatever, and yet here's a trade-off between all three of them, right? It's one of those things that if you don't do it properly, it just becomes a thing that you always do afterward. And by then, sometimes it's either too late or it just causes burnout, where an engineer says, yeah, I would love to care about cloud costs too, but can you give me the right tooling that isn't just a report that says I'm spending too much money, right? If you don't go beyond that, it's going to get very difficult to kind of give the engineers the right tooling in the life cycle that they actually have to say, well, this what if scenario that you're describing of this Gen AI product that you want to launch, which everyone is super excited about, if you use this model based on the test data, it's going to cost this much every single time person hits it, and based on historical evidence, right, in our production environment, this is the number of users we're expecting. If you use this other model, it might be cheaper or it might be more expensive, but this is the value you get back in return there. And so being able to do these three things really well, being able to connect to an actual outcome from the business and not necessarily on just a raw number that you're trying to raise or lower, being able to explain the why and not necessarily just the what, and then finally being able to deliver the right insights, I think can really be powered by Gen AI now as well, right? Imagine a world where, in my CEO example, instead of him or her going towards the CTO, to the director, to the FinOps engineer, they can just ask in English, where is most of my spend going? When I renew my PPA, what are the SKUs I should try to actually get a discount on? Or for an engineer, a what-if analysis that, sure, we want to launch and migrate from VMs to containers. What is the cost going to be if I just did a lift and shift? What if I actually just use Fargate? Or what if I want to do EKS itself? And what would that look like there? On the second pillar for me is around efficiency. And I think this is where we've spent a lot of time in the last 5 or 6 years in FinOps, right? It's all about optimization. And traditionally, the FinOps optimization story goes something along what I call the FinOps moment, where the bill is running and all of a sudden you see a giant spike that's unexplained and everyone freaks out about it. And we start looking and it's almost like a duck hunt. We find $1 million here, we find $20,000 there. And a lot of these tools that are out there will help you with this, right? They'll be able to analyze your cost and be able to tell you, hey, you should consolidate your VPC endpoints. You should look at lowering the utilization on your VM, or rather, fixing the VM size so you can match the utilization. But what I find often though is a lot of these optimization recommendations fall short because they don't understand your architecture. It might be that the VPC endpoint consolidation, when you go to the team that's doing networking, might say, well, the way we deployed our network and every single account, it'll take 9 months to do, to save 1%. We don't really fully understand the cost of actually doing some of these actions in a way that actually gives confidence to the teams that are supposed to be taking these actions in a way that they'll actually apply them, right? It might be that the recommendation says, switch to ARM processors, it's way cheaper, but your quant libraries only run on x86. So you can look at it, you can feel bad about it, you can ignore it, but oftentimes as soon as you start ignoring these things, you start losing value and realizing, well, the analysis is not really done. The report card that I get from FinOps says I have a C- on my team, and my product head is really upset about it, but I can't really do any of these things anyway, right? So being able to focus on the what matters most for performance and value, and understanding the context of what's actually happening in your architecture becomes really important, right? It might be that when you start looking at models in Gen AI and you say, well, why are we using Sonnet 4.5? We don't need to use this. We should be using a quantized version because that's what this recommendation says. And you realize, well, the thing that we're actually using it for requires this model. Or if every engineer starts loading their full context window because it's 2 million, right? It's amazing. And the answers you're getting back are now running up the bill. Instead of looking at that and saying, well, shorten the context window, if you don't understand, well, you don't have an embeddings model in the middle of it, and 85% of your stuff is the most generic MCP answers, it's really difficult to now have engineers start to think about these things in a way that moves the needle. Being able to prioritize these decisions in a way that isn't left to someone to look at these 17 pages of optimizations and figure out, yeah, I guess we'll do this one. It'll go in the backlog of a team until someone freaks out about it. And instead, being able to now meet them where they are, right? When someone is doing an actual architecture and they're doing performance testing in non-prod, being able to have the cost data right there that says, yes, you got your performance that you really cared about, but at what cost? Right? And there's 2 different alternatives that you could actually do for similar performance for a fraction of the cost. Or conversely, when you see an optimization, instead of thinking about only the actual thing that you have to do, be it Terraform, CloudFormation, whatever, but really understanding your full architecture, that the way you've set up your accounts, the way you have set up your organization, it's going to be very difficult to do this in a timely manner, and you'll have to do a lot more testing in order to actually do this. That's what's missing today. And finally, I think on the optimization side, I know Joe's here from FinOps, we always talk about shift left, right? Everything should be shifting left. All the engineers should be the ones who think about these things, and product teams should think about cloud cost as a first and foremost. But I think sometimes there's a lot of different examples where shift left doesn't really apply, and we should be able to automate these things. An example of that is in Kubernetes, right? Each workload, you went from a VM that was, say, 20 gigs with 4 vCPUs, and you go to containers, and your engineers will say, well, I need 20 gigs and 4 vCPUs too. That made sense before. And you get this utilization number that says you're using 10% of your node in Kubernetes. And all of a sudden, you now have engineers trying to figure out, well, I guess I need 10 gigs. I think I need 3.2 CPUs. And you do this entire performance test to figure out, and you isolate the costs. But then as soon as you pull out another PR, or you start making more calls to the database, or there's a refactor that was benign, the number might go way down or way up. And so oftentimes I feel like, especially in Kubernetes, it doesn't make sense to have engineers always be shifting left and worrying about these things. We should be able to automate them. We shouldn't necessarily have to have every single engineer care about these things to the level where they feel obligated to now not only do security, not only do observability, reliability, on and on and on, and then also think, well, what are these dials should be set to exactly to get performance at the cost as well. We should be able to automate these things when they happen. On the governance side, I think this is where Gen AI will be really helpful and will be really needed. Governance up till now has been around, specifically cost governance, it's really been around anomaly detections, right? When the cost exceeds a number or a budget is breached by a certain amount, alert somebody. That's pretty much what we do today. And I find that really challenging because oftentimes when you look at that in isolation, you get the alert, it fires off, it might go to PagerDuty, it might go to the SRE team, maybe the engineers, maybe it opens a backlog ticket in your Jira board that says, fix this. And when you go to take a look at it, there's a lot of legwork to be done, right? You have to understand, well, why did this actually happen? Was this a good thing? Maybe you spend 24 hours looking at an anomaly and realize, well, we were in the front of TechCrunch, and this is not a bad thing at all. The cost should be going up because we're scaling automatically, right? Maybe you had a great quarter and all of a sudden you're doing a lot of quant calculations because you're making a lot of revenue. Well, of course the cost is gonna go up, but without that context of why it's happening is really difficult. And oftentimes what I found is that engineers will get this alert, might be product or might be whoever, and as soon as they see, well, this was a false alarm, right? Even if the limits are set to say reasonable numbers, like only if the cost goes up $100,000, alert me. If it was a good thing and not a bad thing, you're gonna start ignoring it. And oftentimes when you start ignoring these things is when the real problems arise, because you kind of ignore the actual issue when it happens, because every single time you've taken a look, it just feels like it's another thing to ignore. So being able to fix these things, to me, comes down to this, right? It's very similar to security in a way. You want to prevent the bad things from happening, first and foremost, right? In FinOps, it might be that you want to prevent in your ephemeral environments anything but spot instances, right? It might be that the Gen AI team is the only one that should use the P5 clusters, in Kubernetes because it's $95 an hour or whatever, and you don't want anyone else to touch them. Or it might be, on and on, all these different rules that you want to set in place that are, at the same time, not too restrictive where you're blocking innovation in your teams, but also not so brittle that every single time you set a policy in place, an engineer comes to you and everything's an exception all the time, right? Eventually, if you start doing that, the teams will basically just raise an exception for everything they want to do, and this entire prevention system that we built kind of goes out the window. The second step is, if you find you can prevent a lot of these things from happening, they'll still happen, right? There'll still be rules that were slipped or someone went in console in your non-prod environment, did one small thing that now raised the bar, right? Or raised the price rather. And when those things happen, you want to detect them as soon as possible. And you want to detect them not at the level of just only cost, which we're used to, but you want to detect the underlying reason for it. It might be that the thing that someone was trying, they forgot to quote unquote shut off the lights, right? It was a experiment they were running on inference or training a model, and afterward they forgot to right size the cluster right after. It might be they're doing performance testing and 24 hours later the performance test is done, but 6 months later you discover this cluster is still running there, right? Or as a personal example, once I had a call from AWS Partners where they said this account that runs only $400 a month is up to $180,000 in 24 hours. And we started looking, we're like, oh God, what happened? The FinOps moment. And it turns out someone was trying to do exponential backoff on queues, and they were using serverless, Lambdas. And so it should be really cheap, except they didn't really implement the exponential part properly. So we're retrying the same failed message 600 times a second for 24 hours. And all of a sudden you realize, well, why did we not know about this immediately? Why did we have to wait until either getting a call or an anomaly 7 or 8 hours later? And oftentimes when you get this anomaly, why was it not told me immediately what was the cause of it? And today we get the cause in terms of this service is the one that's spending a lot of money. But what we don't get is the context of this PR that was raised, that was being done by this team, and this is what the code snippet was doing. This change is causing this to happen, right? So being able to fully embed the context of what we're describing here, I think we'll do two things. One, we'll get away from this idea of, wolf, the boy who cried wolf all the time, of random anomaly alerts that you ignore, budgets that are out of date, so you say, no, it's fine. We had a meeting last month that we updated the budget, but we forgot to tell the FinOps team about it. But instead you get into a place where, especially with AI agents, where you can actually look at an anomaly, and by the time it hits your desk, you're getting the full context of why it happened, what's happening, and then finally how to remediate it. And today, remediation is one of those things that we don't really offer, right? We say, hey, there's an issue, go take a look at it, figure it out. And oftentimes, there's a lot of time spent trying to figure this out, right? Either is it a code change? Was it that we had a lot more volume and it was a good thing, like I said earlier? Was there something else causing this entirely? Could it have been that the savings plan ran out, and so now the cost is spiking, and that is a reason for it, and not that EC2 is all of a sudden 40% higher than it was last month, right? So being able to now remediate it in a way that, in fact, why even stop there? Instead of just showing you what it is that you should fix, oftentimes I feel like in security, we would be able to patch something immediately. We give access to a lot of our security tools that if they detect a vulnerability, fix it on the spot. And now, in my mind, FinOps is one of those things that doesn't have to be all the way there, but it can be a lot closer to it. For example, in remediation, when you have a issue that happens and it was caused by a code change in Terraform or in your application logic, Why can't we just raise the PR automatically? And we still rely on the engineer to actually approve the PR, test it, and then merge it in, but at least get them all the way there, or at least give them the logging from CloudWatch and CloudTrail, VPC flow logs maybe of this is the cause, this is what we think, and we did research for you already. And maybe in some environments, like say your non-prod or experimental environment, why don't we fix these things automatically, right? The example I used earlier of shutting down the lights, right? Experiment is over, the model looks great, we're gonna go to production with it. We don't need to rely on every engineer to remember to now spin down that instance or in the performance environment. We should be able to do it automatically within rules that actually make sense. And the way we make these rules, right, of the prevention, the detection, and the remediation should follow a security model as well. Instead of having very brittle policies that always are out of date, which are full of exceptions, which aren't catching the new things anyway, we should be in a place where they're all continuously learning as well. We should be in a place where a centralized FinOps team can put very basic rules in place initially for some environments. In the higher environments, really lock them down to prevent these things from occurring. And then when there's an exception, automatically apply it in a way that isn't an exception anymore, but now becomes a standard there. Now, assuming that what I just described to you of like between the data side, between the governance side and efficiency side, let's take an example here, right? So assume that you run a B2B SaaS company, you come to reInvent and it takes off. Everyone comes to your booth, they love it, and they start using it properly. Everyone's signing up for it, it's amazing. Tomorrow morning, you'll get a bill that says your bill is up 1,000%. Now in FinOps 2.0 and 1.0, what would happen is someone would get this bill in your company, absolutely freak out about it, and now start going down the rabbit hole of what's causing this. They would see some things that are spiking, there's some resiliency issues that are happening, some things are scaling horizontally in a way they didn't intend, on and on and on, and eventually maybe the product team would chime in and say, oh no, that's expected. We look at the amount of daily users we have, right? Eventually the CTO or CFO would also get involved because the bill is so much higher than they expected. The procurement team might freak out about it because the PPA was for a lot less than what they had intended. They could have gotten a bigger discount. In FinOps 3.0, the response would be an agent that's running, sees the spike, understands that the reInvent's happening, sees all these traffic coming in from new user signups, and people are actually trying the application out immediately, and then understand, well, the unit price per daily active user is actually going down. We're actually scaling really, really efficiently, and this baseline cost that we had, this is a really good thing. So there should not be an alert fired. In fact, maybe there's a report that's sent out that says, hey, this is something that is now occurred, but this is the context of it. The CEO gets it, the product team gets it, maybe the engineering team gets a report that shows them, at scale, these two services are the ones you should try to optimize, and here's a PR that actually helps you optimize them. So when you start scaling horizontally, it isn't this giant spike going forward. Maybe there's an architectural review that you can do on the fly to change things, try it out in non-prod with the volume that you're looking at, and then apply it within a couple of hours. And the outcome really would be here that, instead of like always thinking about the what and this feeling of the number is always going up, the cloud cost is too high, we're freaking out about it. You should be in a place where cloud cost is in context of all these other things you care about. So regardless of whether it goes up or down, you understand the context of it, which gives a lot of confidence in being able to not only save money, but also spend more money, right? The confidence to actually get out of this POC for all these good ideas you have of using GenAI workloads, and actually start moving them to production, because you're no longer worried about the fact that, well, last time we did a GenAI project, we launched it, it was $1 million more than we intended. So let's slow down on it. Instead, you have confidence that the build that you're expecting and the data that you're looking at is full of context of what you're getting back in return. You have the anomaly set up in a way that you're only getting the things that are actual issues, like my serverless Lambda moment. And you're also being able to build policies in place that are not so brittle that the team is spending time just doing this nonstop. Instead, they're self-healing in a way. And to do everything I'm describing, it's only really possible today, in my mind, with GenAI, right? Being able to connect the cost data, your business data, performance data all together in this Venn diagram where you fully understand what is actually happening. Before, it would take a lot of effort. It'd probably be in Excel. You'd probably be trying to combine different data sets together and be very time and place. You might do this once a quarter, once a year, or whenever the CEO freaks out about the cost. Instead, you should be able to do this continuously. You should be able to look at your data in the fully loaded context I'm describing in near real time. You should be able to understand that the cost data that's spiking is a good thing, like I said. The other side is automating the analysis, right? So on the optimization side, instead of just only looking at in isolation, we should do this, which will result in lower cost, we should be able to understand, well, the cost of doing that would require a full rewrite and a replatforming of our entire application. That's going to take 10 months. We don't have to wait that long. Can we do something today, right? Sure, that thing may cost, save 9% year over year, but at what cost, right? Will the engineering teams drop everything they're doing to focus on this one thing versus something that could be a very minor change today that can start saving you money immediately? And finally, being able to learn from this context, right, in a way that you can actually guide the prevention, the detection, the remediation automatically to help shift not so much left anymore, but back to the center where it actually makes sense, right? Instead of having engineers being overloaded to say, now also worry about the myriad of different things that you have to do in cloud, we can actually help them and give them the right data so they can make better decisions. We should be able to have our CEOs ask the question, not in an email chain that goes 9 messages deep before it hits the person who's doing the work, but maybe they can just ask in English, and your AI agent can run in the background, getting the relevant data, doing the what-if analysis, and giving the answer that they actually need in the right moment there. So yeah, in summary, I think this continuous learning that we're describing of FinOps going from the static once-in-a-time thing that we try to do, we get the flywheel effect going instead. We start thinking about cloud costs as a key point in a decision tree when we're making architectural decisions, business decisions, and product decisions, rather than something to look at that has to always be lowered or freak out about because the number's too high. We should be able to have this done autonomously in a way that we're not asking our engineers to spend so much time analyzing this data that we have to build a FinOps team to be 10 analysts who are just continuously serving as almost like an internal consultancy of sorts, right? Engineers come to your team, the bill is too high, help me figure it out, and we do this process again and again. Instead, we meet them where they are. We connect with them, maybe in their CI/CD pipeline. Maybe we give them the right tooling for the centralized team to build these guardrails and policies in place that don't require you to have a mathematics degree to build out policies, right? Maybe we are finally moving from a place where we have these anomalies that are lacking context and go into the dustbin, so to speak, but instead are full of information and actually help you because the only time they're raised is when there's an actual issue there. And then finally, going from this cost data in isolation towards this connected data and being able to use that to make better decisions is finally where we can get to with Gen AI. So for me, going back to my city example, it was never about cutting cost. It was always about giving the confidence to spend more money, right? Because I feel like the true value of cloud is that you're getting just the right amount of compute, storage, databases, whatever, when you actually need it, and not this thing that where every time you deploy something and you take a look at it, you're finding all these random issues. Because every time you find these issues of either unattached EBS volumes or whatever, you start to lose a little bit of confidence, right? You start to get into a place where there's a little bit of hesitation before we open up the floodgates for this beautiful Gen AI thing that you built, and yet you don't understand why someone's not signing off on it, right? You get into a place where you have confidence that not only are we going to launch this, we have confidence that if there's something that happens, we'll be able to find out about it immediately, and we might be able to fix it, within an hour, within 2 hours or something. With that, I'll open up the floor for any questions. Thank you.